You know El Chapo, the billionaire drug lord who escaped prison twice and built an empire that stretched across continents? But what if I told you that behind the legend of the world's most wanted man, there was a predator who used his power to exploit, control, and destroy the women around him? Meet Joaquin Archibaldo Guzman Loera, also known as El Chapo, the man who didn't just traffic drugs, he trafficked lives. Today, we're diving into the twisted, toxic reality of his relationships with women. Cooperating witnesses claimed in unsealed court documents that Guzman had girls as young as about 13 brought to him, allegedly drugged and sexually assaulted at a ranch. This is the story of El Chapo's love life, and it's one you won't forget. Before El Chapo became the face of international drug trafficking, before the billions, before the violence that would claim thousands of lives, he was just another young man from the mountains of Sinaloa. It was in those early years before the world knew his name that he met his first wife. Her name was Alejandrina Maria Salazar Hernandez. She was from Sinaloa, just like him. Their meeting wasn't dramatic or cinematic. It was traditional, simple, the kind of union that happened through local connections, through family ties, through the quiet networks that held rural Mexican communities together. Alejandrina became his wife when El Chapo was still building his reputation, still learning the trade, still years away from becoming the monster the world would come to know. By all accounts, this was a low-profile relationship. Traditional, she gave him children, she kept his home, she was the woman behind the man before the man became a legend. But here's what you need to understand about El Chapo. As the money started rolling in, as the power grew, as the Sinaloa cartel expanded from regional operation to global empire, something shifted inside him. The man who once married a local girl through family connections started to believe he was untouchable. He started to believe he was a king, and kings, in his mind, could have anything they wanted. By the time El Chapo hit his stride in the cartel world, the money was insane. We are talking hundreds of millions of dollars, private ranches, fleets of vehicles, an army of sicarios at his command, and with that money came a twisted sense of entitlement. El Chapo did not just want one woman, he wanted many. And he did not just want willing partners, he wanted control, total, absolute control. According to testimony from cooperating witnesses in unsealed court documents, Guzman had a system. He allegedly had cartel members kidnap young girls, some as young as 13 years old, drug them and bring them to his ranch. Let that sink in for a moment. This was not romance. This was not even infidelity in the traditional sense. This was predatory. This was evil. El Chapo allegedly referred to these girls as his vitamins, as if they were something he consumed to keep himself going, as if they were objects, not human beings with lives, families, and futures. The allegations paint a picture of a man who used his power not just to build an empire, but to satisfy his darkest impulses without consequence. At his ranch, surrounded by armed guards and insulated by layers of cartel protection, El Chapo allegedly created a world where he could do whatever he wanted. And what he wanted was control over young, vulnerable girls who had no way to fight back. The details that emerged during his trial were disturbing. Witnesses described a pattern of abuse, of coercion, of girls being brought to him against their will, drugged into compliance, and used for his pleasure. This was not a man having affairs. This was a man weaponizing his power to exploit the most vulnerable people he could find. And the worst part, inside the cartel, this behavior was normalized. No one questioned it. No one stopped it. Because when you are El Chapo, when you control billions of dollars and thousands of armed men, who is going to tell you no? But the abuse did not stop with anonymous victims at a ranch. El Chapo also had multiple wives at the same time. This is widely accepted as true. It is not even disputed. El Chapo was married or in long-term unions with more than one woman simultaneously, and inside cartel culture, this was normalized. It was rarely hidden. After Alejandrina, there was Griselda Lopez Perez, who gave him more children. Then there was Estela Pina, another woman who bore his name and his children. And finally, there was Emma Coronel Aispuro, the beauty queen who became his most famous wife. But here's the thing about El Chapo's wives. They were not just partners. They were assets. According to court evidence, prosecutors revealed that El Chapo's wives and partners were used as cartel messengers. They passed messages between him and his lieutenants. They carried information when he was in hiding or imprisoned. They helped maintain control over the organization when he could not be physically present. Emma Coronel herself was convicted in the United States for assisting cartel operations, not for violence, but for helping the machine keep running. So let's be clear about what this means. El Chapo did not just have multiple wives because he was a philanderer. He had multiple wives because they were useful. They were tools, extensions of his power, women who could move through the world in ways he could not, carrying his orders, maintaining his influence, keeping his empire alive. And the women? They had no real choice. When you're married to El Chapo, you don't just walk away. You're in the cartel. You're part of the operation. And if you try to leave, if you try to betray him, you know what happens. You've seen what happens to people who cross El Chapo. So these women lived in a gilded cage. They had money, they had status, they had children with one of the most powerful men in the world, but they also lived in fear. Fear of what he might do, fear of what his enemies might do, fear of what would happen if they ever tried to escape. Let's talk about control for a moment, because that's what this was really about. El Chapo didn't love these women, not in any real sense. He controlled them. He controlled when they could speak, where they could go, who they could see. He controlled their bodies, their lives, their futures. And he did it all with a smile, with gifts, with the illusion of affection. But underneath it all was a simple, terrifying truth. If you were a woman in El Chapo's life, you belonged to him. You were his property. And property doesn't get to say no. The allegations that came out during his trial painted a picture of a man who saw women as objects to be collected, used, and discarded. The young girls at the ranch were called vitamins. The wives who carried his messages were treated as tools. The mothers of his children were treated as extensions of his legacy. None of them were seen as full human beings with their own desires, their own dreams, their own autonomy. They were all just pieces on El Chapo's chessboard, moved around to serve his needs, his ego, his insatiable hunger for power. And here's the thing that makes it even more disturbing. El Chapo wasn't some unhinged maniac who couldn't control himself. He was calculated. He knew exactly what he was doing. He built a system that allowed him to exploit women with impunity. He surrounded himself with people who would enable his behavior, who would bring him what he wanted, who would never question his actions. He created a world where he was God, and everyone else, especially the women, were there to serve him. Now, let's be clear about something. When we talk about El Chapo's wives helping the cartel, we're not talking about them being innocent bystanders. Some of them actively participated in the organization. Emma Coronel was convicted for her role in helping El Chapo escape from prison in 2015. She passed messages, she coordinated logistics, she was part of the operation. But here's the question we have to ask. How much of that was choice and how much of that was survival? When you're married to a man like El Chapo, when you're the mother of his children, when you're living inside a world where violence is the currency of power, what options do you really have? If you refuse to help, what happens to you? If you try to leave, where do you go? If you betray him, who protects you from the consequences? The truth is, these women were trapped. They were trapped by love, by fear, by the sheer impossibility of escaping a man who had the resources to find anyone, anywhere, at any time. So yes, some of El Chapo's wives helped the cartel, but they did it in a context where saying no could mean death. Not just for them, but for their children, their families, everyone they loved. That's the reality of being a woman in El Chapo's world. You're not a partner, you're a prisoner. And the bars of your cage are made of money, power, and the constant threat of violence. Now, we need to talk about the difference between what is proven and what is alleged. Because when it comes to El Chapo's treatment of women, there are facts, and then there are claims that never resulted in convictions. Here is what we know for sure. El Chapo had multiple wives. That's factual. Some of those wives helped the cartel. That is proven in court. Emma Coronel was convicted. That is a matter of public record. But many of the darker claims, the allegations of systematic abuse, of girls being drugged and assaulted, of women being controlled through fear and coercion, are based on witness testimony. They are allegations, not convictions. Does that mean they are not true? No. It means they were never proven beyond a reasonable doubt in a court of law. But here is what we can say with certainty. The pattern of behavior is clear. El Chapo was a man who used his power to control the people around him. He was a man who saw women as tools, as assets, and as objects to be used for his benefit. He created a world where he could do whatever he wanted to whomever he wanted without consequence. And whether or not every single allegation is true, the overall picture is undeniable. El Chapo was toxic. He was abusive. He was a predator who used his wealth and power to exploit vulnerable people, especially women and girls. So what's the legacy of El Chapo's love life? It's a trail of broken lives. It's women who were used and discarded. It's children who grew up without a father because he was too busy building an empire and satisfying his own desires. It's young girls who were allegedly drugged and assaulted, their childhoods stolen by a man who saw them as nothing more than vitamins to keep himself going. El Chapo is now serving life in prison in the United States. He'll never see freedom again. But the damage he did to his wives, to his victims, to the countless women whose lives he touched, that damage is permanent. Emma Coronel served her time and was released. She's trying to rebuild her life, to move forward, to be a mother to her daughters. But she'll always be known as El Chapo's wife. She'll always carry that weight. The other wives, the other women, they're scattered now. Some are in hiding, some are trying to live quiet lives. Some are still dealing with the trauma of what they experienced, and the young girls who were allegedly brought to his ranch. We don't know what happened to most of them. We don't know if they got help, if they healed, if they were able to move on. What we do know is that they were victims of a system that valued power over humanity, that saw women as commodities, that allowed a man like El Chapo to do whatever he wanted without consequence. El Chapo built an empire on drugs, violence, and corruption, but he also built it on the backs of women who had no choice, no voice, no way out. He was a man who used his power not just to control territory and move product, but to control people, especially the women in his life. He had multiple wives at the same time, using them as messengers and tools for his cartel. He allegedly had young girls brought to him, drugged and assaulted, treating them like objects for his consumption. He created a world where he was king, and everyone else, especially women, existed only to serve him. That's not love. That's not even desire. That's evil, pure calculated evil. And while El Chapo sits in a supermax prison in Colorado, serving life without parole, the women he used, abused, and discarded are still dealing with the consequences. Some are trying to rebuild, some are still trapped in the world he created, and some we'll never hear from again. El Chapo's love life wasn't a love life at all. It was a horror story, a story of power, control, and the complete dehumanization of women. And it's a reminder that behind every cartel empire, behind every billionaire drug lord, there are victims. People whose lives were destroyed so that men like El Chapo could feel powerful. Subscribe to Inform Secreto to continue exploring the hidden stories behind power. Real stories told unfiltered. Because what you don't see also controls the world.